We're moving into a time in our Lenten season where the passages of Scripture that we talk about don't necessarily lend themselves to all the warm, fuzzy feelings. We're getting closer and closer, obviously, to the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. And one of the realities of this is that there's a darkness before the celebration of Easter. Just the reality of it. There's a darkness before the dawn. But here's what I want to say today. Even in the darkness, there are glimmers of hope. And that's what we hang on to. And in a few moments, we're gonna celebrate with several people in their baptism. So what's going to happen is they're going to be immersed in this water. So that immersion in that water, that baptism, symbolizes and represents a choice. That water and being immersed in that represents a decision on someone's part. And it's interesting how often in Scripture water comes up as a moment either where God reveals himself to people or God asks for a decision. And we see one of those in a passage of Scripture that I want to read for you right now. You'll see it on the screen, Matthew 27, verses 22 through 26. It says, "What shall I do then with Jesus, who is called the Messiah?" Pilate asked. They all answered, "Crucify him." "Why? What crime has he committed?" asked Pilate. But they shouted all the louder, "Crucify him." When Pilate saw that he was getting nowhere, but that instead an uproar was starting, he took water and he washed his hands in front of the crowd. "I'm innocent of this man's blood," he said. "It's your responsibility." All the people answered, "His blood's on us and our children." Then he released Barabbas to them, but he had Jesus flogged and handed him over to be crucified. So I want to ask you a favor today. This was one of those sermons, and with baptism and this idea of water kept, again, coming to me. This isn't probably a sermon, per se. It's more of a story. And so I'm going to ask you, if you would, just to kind of enter into something that I just took some time to write a little bit. Pontius Pilate was irritated. It is not often that you get called to a 6 a.m. meeting. Jerusalem was waking up at that time as Roman guards escorted Pontius Pilate to meet with the Jewish high priest. Now, Pilate had a distaste for all of these religious leaders in this place that he'd found himself. From a Roman perspective, Jerusalem was low on the spectrum of where governmental officials wanted to find themselves. You could be on the coast in Spain, having a great time, or you could be serving in luxury in Rome itself, but instead, Pontius Pilate was assigned to govern people following some backward religion who constantly argued about the place of their religion in the state. And he hated it. He grew tired of it. He was a Roman. To him, Roman pride was more important than Jewish religion. So he would push back every once in a while against this Jewish religion. When a new aqueduct needed to be built in Jerusalem, instead of Rome paying for it or figuring out other ways to pay for it, Pilate just took money from the temple to pay for it. There was a constant tension between Pilate and these Jewish leaders. Needless to say, a 6 o'clock in the morning appointment, an emergency meeting with the Jewish leaders, was not helping. This did not help. Now, as Pilate is making his way, he could see the high priest from a distance. He was hard to miss. He was in all of this regalia, this bright garb, this priestly high priest robe with all of these adornments and a hat and everything. Usually those things were under lock and key by Rome. The Roman authority in this situation, Pilate, would hold those things under a lock and key, except this was Passover week. And so 1 week a year, these things would be released out of this closet for the high priest to wear. The reason that this was such a big deal is because if you gave them just a little bit of leverage, next thing you know, they'd want to start talking about independence from Rome and all kinds of different things. And so Pilate kind of kept a good lid on that. He had done really well up to this point, keeping them contained, keeping revolts at bay while Rome continued to establish itself in the region. But as he's getting closer and closer to this high priest, he sees a whole lot of other things begin to unfold. He sees that already the governing authorities of the Sanhedrin were already there, kind of the religious Supreme Court. They're already there. Teachers of the law are there. There are scribes that are already in this situation, as well as those tasked with policing the temple and making sure people kept order in the midst of everything. So as Pilate approaches, all of a sudden the high priest runs up to him kind of shocked with a sense of urgency, and he says, "Hey, I'm sorry it's so early in the morning, but we have an emergency. There is a man." And he steps to the side, and he hadn't seen him before, but here is this man. He's thin, he's disheveled, he's got a tattered robe hanging on him, and he's bound in chains. And the high priest says, "This man right here has been going around telling everybody that he's a king. In fact, he's been speaking against supporting Caesar, supporting Rome." In other words, this man that Pilate is looking at, he's a political dissident. In the empire, there's no room for objectors. There's no room for counter-narratives. There's no room for dissidents. So the answer for Pontius Pilate, who's a politician, he's got to move quick. He's got to make some decisions. But there's something about this entire scene that does not make any sense to him at all. First of all, it's clear that this man standing in front of him had already been roughed up a little bit. So it had been a rough night for whoever this was standing in front of him. And it's clear that this man is not a threat. In fact, he looks really, really weak. He looks like somebody who's standing in front of him who's already given up. Like he's not even there for a fight. And so that's the scene in front of him. So, and now you got to imagine, here's Pontius Pilate. He's got some beautiful garb on. It's gold-laced. So he looks the part of an authority. He looks the part of a king, in a way. And he's standing in front of this man who's this giant threat that requires him to be at a 6 o'clock in the morning meeting. So Pilate, he cuts right to the chase. He's, all right. So he asks the guy, he says, "Hey, have you been telling people that you're the king of the Jews?" He cuts right to it. To which this man softly replies, "If that's what you say." It's a non-answer. It's a non-answer. So I can imagine Pilate, again, it's 6 o'clock in the morning. He's looking around. The sun is beginning to peek up over the horizon. He's looking at all these religious leaders thinking, I've never met people like you. You're so goofy. You're so backwards. You're so passionate about stupid stuff. Like, he just thinks, this is a giant waste of my time. You brought this man here for this? But then the high priest, I think he sees something, and so he speaks up. He says this, "Sir," just really quick, there's more. There's more. See, this man, he's leading a revolution. Many, many people are following him. In fact, he's been breaking our religious laws, and he is speaking out against Caesar. And the people are listening. Listen, Pilate, the people are beginning to listen to him. They're gathering. They're starting to organize. And he's even threatened to destroy our temple. Now, revolts are a bad look no matter what political party you're a part of. They would have been really bad for Pilate because he really, really wanted to get out of Jerusalem. This was a stop on some kind of political journey. This was not the end of his political journey. He did not want to be there. Okay? So a revolt would look very, very bad for Pilate in Rome's eyes. He'd hear from Rome, and if he ever hoped to get out of that, he needed to squelch it. So he asks this man a very, very specific question. And it's a good question. He says, "Hey, they're saying this stuff about you. Are you going to defend yourself? Like, are you going to speak up and fight for yourself at all?" Nothing. This man says nothing. He just stands there. Silence. Now, politics are politics, whether it's 2,000 years ago or today. Okay? This man had become popular with the very people that Pilate needed to control. Pilate needed to control them. He needed to keep them in line. To condemn that man, it might look bad because clearly he's weak, but also clearly he has a following. He's a man of the people. So he looks to this group and he says, I don't have a problem with the guy. Like, he's not doing anything against Rome. Like, this is kind of a silly situation. And the high priest starts to freak out because they've arrested this guy overnight, and they brought him in, they've trumped up all this different stuff. So they're a little bit nervous. So he's frustrated. So he points out, he says, look, he's been inciting the masses as far as Galilee. And in that moment, just like that, Pilate sees his opportunity. See, Galilee, if Jerusalem was backwards, Galilee was like not even hardly on the map, okay? It was way out there. Nobody cared about Galilee. There's a guy, his name is Herod. He has jurisdiction over Galilee. And so Pilate's thinking, what am I messing with this stuff for? Like, he's from Galilee? All right, send him to Herod. Let's send him to Herod and let Herod deal with this. So Pilate's like, cool, I'm out. I'm out. So they sent him to Herod, which is what he did. And then a few hours later, they brought him back. When they brought him back, he was now wearing a purple robe because clearly Herod thought it was a joke. This man showing up saying he's a king. So Herod had some fun with him and sent him back to Pilate saying, this is a joke. It's a joke. The next logical step for Pilate, okay, I can't figure out what he's done wrong to me or Rome, and clearly Herod's not going to do anything. So listen, Jewish leaders, he's yours. Like, he's a Jew. So, like, deal with your own family problem here. So he passes it back off on the religious leaders, but the high priest, he's even more agitated now. He's like, you are not understanding the situation. We can't do anything. We can't, because you're Roman, you're in charge. So he's been telling people he's God, which is a capital offense religiously. It's blasphemy. And it requires death according to our religious law. He should die, but the problem is, under your law, we can't do anything about it. You're the only one who can kill him. You're the only one who can take his life for the blasphemy he is bringing against us. So again, Pilate is cornered. He's this politician. He's cornered. He doesn't know what to do. His decisions have got to be calculated, and he's kind of stuck in this situation. And so they really, really wanted this man that they brought before him to die. To die. So he has the guards bring this man into a 26,000 square foot giant courtyard, polished stone. Maybe about 4 times the size of this room. Huge area. They go to the middle of it. And it was a gesture. He leans into Jesus. It's just Pilate and Jesus. He leans in. He says, where are you from? It's a gesture. He's like, I'm giving you a chance here. Like, defend yourself. Because I don't want to do what they're asking me to do. Where are you from? The man remains silent. And then Pilate, he says, I understand. Do you not see that I have the power of life and death over you? Do you not understand the gravity of this situation? They want you dead. I don't want to kill you, but I have the power right now of life and death over you. And finally, this man chooses to speak. And this is what he says. He looks Pilate in the eyes and softly says, you would have no power over me unless it were given to you from above. So the one that handed me over to you is guilty of a greater sin. Now, from the outside looking in, giant room, here's these two, they're in the middle of it. From the outside looking in, you've got this beaten man in this giant purple robe hanging on him. He's chained, and you've got Pilate, beautiful garb, white, glowing, because he's got gold all over himself. And from all outward appearances, it looks like Pilate is the one with all of the power. But I'm going to guess in that moment, Pilate did not feel like he had all the power because he did not know what was going on. He didn't understand. So, he flexed. Like, all right, well, I just don't want to kill him. So let's beat him. Let's beat him really, really bad. And maybe that will allow the Jewish leaders to understand, I do have the power. I do have the power. And so he releases Jesus to be flogged. Onlookers watched as a whip with lead pierced Jesus' back, tore his flesh from his body. And as Pilate was waiting for this all to finish, a servant came and slipped a note into his hand. He opened it up. It's from his wife, Claudia. I had a dream about an innocent man, so please be careful. And all of a sudden, as he folded it, he didn't have time really to think too much more about it before he gets brought out again. And now Jesus is in front of him, held up on each side. The blood-stained robe now is dripping. The guards had gone further. They put together a crown of thorns, and they pressed it into his scalp. So the blood now is streaming down his face. There's his king. There's the king with a crown and a robe. Surely, at some point, as Pilate is looking at this, he's got to be thinking, have we not done enough here? Like, can we not see that this man is no threat? They're not satisfied. Somebody from the crowd says, no, kill him. Crucify him. Pilate's political maneuverings didn't work. They didn't work. And he knew. He knew that if he did not do the right thing, listen closely, that this crowd, even these Jewish religious leaders, were probably their next step would be to accuse Pilate of being unsupportive of Caesar and the law of Rome. A death knell for him, politically and personally. So how could Pilate allow a man who claims to be king loose in the Roman Empire? And so he had to choose, which is what he did. He chose water. He's got a beaten, torn, abused, mocked Jesus before him. And he motions for a slave to come near. So a slave comes over, gives him some instructions. The slave goes away. Before long, he comes back carrying a basin of water and a towel. And here's what would have happened. The slave would have gotten on his knees and held the bowl up so that Pilate could just wash his hands in the bowl and then take the towel and symbolically say, I've washed my hands of this man. He's your responsibility. He did it all for one reason, for his own power. He washed his hands of all responsibility. Said, it's not mine. I've got too much at stake. So you do with him what you will. As Jesus is shivering from the shock of this beating, he looks on as Pilate's washing his hands, and it looks familiar. Because the night before, he was on his knees with a basin and a towel, offering a choice. The disciples had gathered for that last meal with Jesus, and they spent their time arguing over which one of them had the most power. Which one of them was the most important? Which one of them had the biggest influence? They hardly noticed Jesus getting on his knees with a basin and a towel to wash their dirty feet. Proud hearts and dirty feet. So he washed their feet, which is the responsibility of a slave. He cleansed them. So Jesus stood in that courtyard with Pilate, watching Pilate wash his hands, dry them off, and exclaimed, "Treason. I wash my hands of this man. I'm innocent of this man's blood." So you have two basins of water. Okay? You have two decisions. You have two choices. The choice of power, the choice of service. Power or service. When Jesus washed the disciples' feet, the question was, would they be willing to serve other people in the same way? Would they be willing to serve in the same way? When Pilate washed his own hands, the answer was clear. I serve myself. Myself or others. Two decisions. The rest of this plays out in the next couple of weeks in our church, but it plays out pretty quickly in the life, the death, the resurrection of Jesus Christ in two basins, a basin of power and a basin of service. And it seems to me that there's an incomplete picture there because I think there's a third basin, and I think this is it right here. Because how in the world do you move from saying no to yourself and yes to others without something else in between that causes you to say, I surrender? It's surrender. The basin of surrender. So you have the basin of power, you have the basin of service. But to move from one to the other, there's going to have to become this moment of surrender. A moment of surrender. A death to self and a resurrection into new life. Doing for us what we could not do for ourselves, which is give us new life. There's a reason that we struggle with power. There's a reason that we struggle with self. There's a reason that we struggle with sin, is we're born bent in on ourselves. There's a reason it's so hard to be selfless towards other people, particularly people who maybe aren't like us, who don't like us. To give ourselves over to serve other people, it's just such a huge chasm. So something has to change in the midst of it, and it has to be our heart. It has to be something on the inside of us that makes us born again, that brings life from death. And there's a reason Jesus says to us, if you want to be my disciple, you've got to deny yourself, pick up a cross, and follow me. It requires that daily death to self, which sounds like a really bad sales pitch. Like who's signing up for that? You sign up for it because you want to live. Because you want real life. And what this represents today, follow the imagery here, is the old is gone, the new has come. I have been crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. The old has been crucified and buried with Jesus, and I have been resurrected with him into a new birth, a new life. It's the choice of this middle basin. It's the choice of this new birth. So as we look at this power dynamic, as we look at this service dynamic, those are, I get that, like we understand those pictures, but there's a surrender dynamic that all of us are called to make. I want you to know I'm so proud of the individuals that are going to be coming up here in just a moment. They've made a choice to surrender. They've made a choice to admit, I have sin in my life. I have sin in my life that keeps me holding on to my basin, that keeps me washing my own hands. I need somebody to wash me. I need somebody to make me whole again, to make me free. And they've made that decision.